Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Love Well podcast. My name is Anna.
And my name is Marlene.
And we are so excited that you guys are joining us today. We decided, since we're going to get into some heavier conversations, we wanted to lay the foundation for the reasoning behind why we chose our next episode on immigration, and just to kind of give you guys a little bit of a preview of what we're going to be talking about. But also, if you didn't already listen to our intro podcast episode, I would say strongly encourage you to go back and listen to that. But basically, we're just going to be covering some stories because we think stories are very beautiful and a personal thing. And our prayer is that as we're sharing our own personal stories, as we bring people on the podcast to share their stories, you guys are not only encouraged by that, but also a little bit more compelled to share your stories with people in your life and what you've experienced as well. But I think one of the things that we both were talking about before we even got into this conversation on immigration was just, I think a lot of times we can think that it's an outside issue, that if it doesn't apply to us, then it really doesn't apply at all. Or if I'm not experiencing this, then there's really no reality that is experiencing this. And I think that's one of the things that we just want to highlight and make sure that everyone feels welcome in this space, to understand that this is a very close reality.
Yeah, it's a day-to-day reality.
Right.
And I think that personally, as an immigrant myself, just seeing what is already out there, which I know there's a lot of educational pieces to it that we will be going into it, but sharing it from more like a firsthand experience. I have not seen as much content that is telling the stories of immigrants like from a direct experience. There are some people, and definitely down the road, we even talked about this, providing some resources and places that we can point you to that have done, if you want to go more in depth about this.
Right.
But bringing it back to just our personal experiences and me being an immigrant, I'm not going to lie, it's a vulnerable thing, I think. And when I talk to other immigrants, it's a very personal thing. It's being an immigrant in this day and age, and I think just in general, it's a unique experience filled with a lot of beauty, but also a lot of struggle, a lot of pain that many people are completely unaware of what immigrants have to go through. So, yeah, just wanting to bring it back to that. And I think that one of the other reasons, that, as you were talking about, just our stories being unique and personal and beautiful, being curious. I know that many people also shy away from talking about this because it ends up into discussion and fighting. And I think you said this once, and it stayed with me. Like, you can't fight someone's stories. Like, it's easy for us to fight statistics, to see like, well, this and look at that. But when you have someone in front of you, you have someone close to you, like the proximity, telling their story, like that changes everything. It's like, well, I can't throw you and put you into this statistic that is very distant, but I'm actually listening to your story. You're telling me about your family. You're telling me about your corner of the world, what it was like to grow up in a different context, reality.
Yeah.
Why did we immigrate here? All the things that come into a person's story. And I have experienced the power of sharing my personal story. And that has brought and helped shift people's, I don't want to say opinions, but more like, oh, wait, like, I can't think of this as something from like far away. You're right in front of me.
Right. It's right there.
You're telling me, you're sharing your story and bringing light to something that I have no clue. So I would just want to say, like, I want to invite you all to just like lean in with curiosity, because I know that I personally, like, immigration is something that I'm like, I can talk about for hours because it's my personal experience. I know that's not everybody's, but I know that when I am not well-versed, I don't feel like I know about things, I usually want to stay away from that or a specific topic. So, just lean in as we, lay the foundation of, why this is important.
I think that's so good. And I think one thing when we did do the intro, if you go back and listen to it, we mentioned that a lot of our friendship has been exactly that. Me asking questions, me, kind of more so on the end of like, okay, so what does that look like? And tell me more about this. And I think as we've grown in our friendship and as I've grown in my understanding with your experiences, I think that has essentially become the seed of why we even started this podcast.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people, even just in my sphere and like my, close-knit friends and community, I feel like there's almost this this misunderstanding that we understand.
Yeah.
Like,
yes.
Like,
yeah.
there's a misunderstanding that, oh, well, yeah, I already know about all that. Or
Yeah.
I already have seen this on the news. I know exactly what that is.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
until you
Yeah.
get close proximity, is counter to what you've heard on the news, or is
Grew
counter
up.
to what you
Yeah.
grew up hearing. Or what you've been told, or all of those things. You really don't have a clear understanding until you do that, I feel like. Which is why we definitely want this space to be, like we said in the intro, it's going to be real conversation.
Yeah.
It's going to be
Yeah.
from a posture of humility. But we want this space to essentially be somewhere where you can find yourself.
Yeah.
And not only with the struggles and the beauty like Marlon talks about, but also just with the educational and the learning and the curiosity and the asking questions. I have friends all the time that are like, I just don't say anything because I don't know what to say.
Yes.
And I'm like, well, then do that.
Yeah.
Ask a question.
And I think we talked about, I actually was just thinking about this. Like, we fear what we don't know, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if we do not become close to it, we will miss out. Because people usually think of like, oh, I don't want to offend people, which, believe me, I've experienced that many times on a consistent basis. But also we miss out on the beauty of having a wider, bigger perspective. And I want to share just a little bit of also the point of view that I'm coming in with. Like, I'm a part of a multi-ethnic marriage as well. My husband's white. And he had to, I remember us hearing like, oh, your marriage is going to be so hard because you guys have different cultures, like on top of marriage being hard. And I'm like, yes, and when we started dating and we did long distance, 2.5 years apart, countries apart, countries apart. So I know people ask like, how did you do it? Yeah, that's a story maybe
That'll
for
be another episode.
maybe another episode. But the beauty of it, the beauty of seeing God expressed in different ways. And I think it was Tim Keller. I love Tim Keller. Said along the lines like, we don't have a full picture of who God is, but until we step into other cultures and other ways of living and other ways of seeing the world.
Good.
And my husband consistently, and he loves like visiting Honduras and loves my family and loves he has immersed himself in my culture. And have there been awkward moments? Yes. Have there been like, hey babe, actually that kind of that's not hey, this is actually how we do it, or
right.
But it takes a lot of humility and a lot of like just taking off like our preference, our way of things that we know, and say, hey, let me lean in and learn about being curious, and then curiosity is the first step, right? And then just like being like, okay, without my experience, without what I've been taught before. Like, let me step into this with no expectation, but getting to know this person and their story.
Right.
And also I just want to name and say, like, my story of immigration is very unique to my experience.
Right.
And there are other people who immigrated here in the same way that I did, that we share similarities. But also, the immigrant experience is not a monolith. Because that's the other thing that I feel people sometimes think is like, oh, yeah, like, there's only one way of how immigration happens. I'm like, no, there's like so much that goes into it, which will go more in depth into the next episode. But I just wanted to say, like, yeah, just like, we invite you into seeing this from a different perspective maybe,
Definitely.
or that you've heard out there or seen, you know. So
That's why we think it's necessary to talk about these things. I know it's not always fun or the most, we love to have fun and we love to laugh and stuff. But I mean, these are some topics that are not always going to be cheery and happy, but I think it's necessary. And one thing you said that kind of struck me was like, as you step into the curiosity phase of these things as well, as we get into this more, I think it's also important to see what kind of fears you have maybe even held on to that you didn't even realize maybe you were fearful of. Because I think, especially as someone, I mean, we can both attest to that, but especially as someone that's learning on the learning side of this, and more so engaging in the experiences that other people have had, I think it's easy to, like I said with my friend group, like at times it's like, well, I just don't want to say the wrong thing. And it's like, but it's okay to be wrong. You know, like I think it's okay with accepting the fear that you're not going to always know what to say. You're not going to always have the right answer. You're not going to always understand completely. And I mean, Marlon and I, we know, like in our friendship, I will firsthand say, I can never say I will experience everything that you've experienced, but I want to be able to empathize with you and be able to be a friend that comes alongside you. I'm not telling you you're crazy. I'm not telling you you're, this doesn't happen. I just want to also make it clear that I probably have never experienced or will experience the things that you've gone through.
For sure.
I think that's the beauty of it, because we have different perspectives, and what I can learn from you helps subside that fear of, oh, what if I said the wrong thing? I mean, when we were talking at the coffee shop about this podcast, I think I literally asked you, like, so what is immigration policy? And what does that even look like? Like, I was like, 101, immigration 101, basics, because I've traveled a lot of places. We both have. But I really have never experienced that from a firsthand basis. So just hearing Marlene's story and her family's story was new to me. So I think it's just important to also put aside our fears and also take account into what fears we've held on to that we didn't realize.
That is so good. It made me think about a million things, but just how it is okay to not know everything. And I think that letting go of that allows us to not be self-righteous people, to lean into others and depend on others.
To love well.
To love well. See what we did there?
The premise of this podcast.
Oh, we did that there. But just like letting go of that, because we need each other. And I think that's, I think God designed it that way. We're not going to know everything. We're not going to have an answer to every single thing.
Right.
And that's why we need each other. That's why
100%.
Our friendship is full of beauty because of that. Because we don't have to have the same experience. We don't have to. And the beauty of it is that in the end, we can have a deep and rich friendship because Jesus is at the heart of it, and we choose to love each other with those differences, and celebrate each other's differences as well.
I was going to say, that's the beauty of different perspectives in my mind, is there's so much richness to it, but I also think you just said, you hit on the nail, like choosing to see it that way is intentional. It takes intentionality. It takes humility. It takes a lot of selflessness. But that's what we're going to talk about a lot on this podcast, is just those things are so important when it comes to loving people well and how to love people well. You have to put on those things. And I was just thinking too, it's funny because I mean, we both come from a Christian background. We're both very strong in our faith. We work for ministries. And I think it's important to also note that in Scripture, God talks about stewarding well things. He talks about, carrying each other's burdens. I mean, these are all things that
we're not saying
we're encompassing
Jesus
to love
it.
well. That's what that looks like. Steward things well, to steward the people in your sphere well, by loving them well, and understanding that they're different, but there's beauty in that.
Yeah. And I also, it's funny for y'all to know, Anna is the one that suggested for us to do this immigration episode. And I was like, I was like, oh, are you sure? Do we want to start with that? I feel that we should leave that for later episodes. But no, I love it because it matters and it's part of my story, you know, and as you will also get to know Anna's story more. And it matters because it also matters to Jesus. And it's not, immigration has been like from the beginning of time, you know, people immigrate and it's all over scripture as well. And it's funny because when I, you know, living in Honduras and when you grow up just and you live in one place, you have one perspective, right? And there are verses in scripture that even for me didn't hit the same way until I became an immigrant myself. And then I looked at all the verses and all, like even Jesus, he went from like, and he became like a refugee, you know, like was forced out, you know, displaced out of his hometown his homeland and had to go. So then that took a whole different perspective for me. And then there's this verse, don't quote me on this because I don't know exactly, literally just gave it, but the verse that you have to care for the poor, the widow, like and the foreigner as well. Right. And I had always dismissed that foreigner part because, you know, it's like, oh yeah, the foreigner. Yeah. And then I became a foreigner in another land, in a new country. And I was like, oh wait, it's because these people are usually in the margins, right? You know, usually. So yeah, so many things that come with that. And I'm like, it matters to Jesus. It's all over there in scripture as well. And it's a part of, you know, my story as well. So wanting to share like that it really matters, even though if it's not a personal experience. And I think someone also shared this a couple years ago, that just because it's not an emergency for me, it doesn't mean that it's an emergency for someone, you know? So just bringing this, because I'm like, okay, we're going to talk about immigration. But bringing it to the heart of like the story, the experience, the firsthand, you know, Jesus in it too. Because we also want to talk about like, as we said, it's not just like a modern thing that happens. No, it's been happening for a long time.
Just like you said, another point of the emergency quote is that it's not only an emergency for us, but also it's not talked about a ton. So in my opinion, there is some urgency to talk about it. And that's why I challenged you. And I was like, you know what? I think this should be our first topic because you have a beautiful story that aligns with that. But also just the fact that, you know, if in my day-to-day conversation, if I mention it, there's not a ton of knowledge or really understanding around it at all here in the States. And I don't know where you guys are tuning in from, but I mean, it's definitely something that even in the church, you know, we don't talk a ton about, even though like you mentioned, there's a ton of scriptures based on it and it's biblical. I mean, it's interesting to me that it's such a profound subject, but there's really not a ton of conversation around it.
Yeah, there is really not a lot of it. And as I share my story and then go more into detail about what immigration and just things that will help you understand a little bit better what it really means, just is not talked about in the church where should be, right? It should be. Right. So yeah, I'm excited that we're able to bring this to light and, you know, it is important.
Yeah. So I think our heart behind the episode as a whole with immigration, when we talk about immigration, is just that we would be able to have the educational piece. There's that whole idea of like, we want to educate you in this space. We want to be able to hopefully, you know, teach you some things, and maybe you're not aware of some of this. So we do want to have that educational piece. However, here's when we say we are no experts in this department. I know, like Marlene mentioned at the beginning, it's a big, lofty topic, and we would be...
There's so many layers to it. There's so many layers, but we want to at least bring some of the basics that will help understand. And I think we said, like, the context, understanding the context of something is really important because then the story makes more sense.
Exactly.
Without that context.
Yes.
And what I've found in my experience as I've shared my story before is like, then people ask me, wait, but how long did this take? Or did you have to pay for this? Or, oh, I assumed you were like when you married an American, like it immediately, so then I realized that educational piece was just super important, and it was not there because there were all these things that people just don't know, and it no, like in no shape or form is like, oh, you should know, because like if you don't experience
you don't know what you don't know.
Exactly, and it makes sense for not everyone will be an expert in this, right? And not because if especially if it's not, if it wasn't my experience, I probably would not know about it either. So with that being said, that is something that is important to bring that context for the stories that we're gonna share to make more sense.
Exactly. Yeah, I love that. So we also just wanted to mention with the educational piece, there's a lot of things that you can get into with it, including policy and, the political spectrum of all of that. But I think our heart is really just to see people for people. Yeah. It's not about policy necessarily. We're just kind of here to offer our stories, but also offer any sort of experience that has helped shape our perspective on things.
Yeah, for sure. And I think our hope in the end is that from hearing these stories, hearing about immigration and what it is, that it will allow you to love your neighbors who are immigrants. Who have that story, to be able to be more curious and say like, okay, I feel a little bit more confident about approaching this person. I know that they just moved to the U.S., or I know that they're second generation immigrants, like that immigration is a part of their story. So that's the hope. That's the hope. That's the heart.
As you were just talking about that just kind of struck this thought that I think the best thing, like we talked about, there's curiosity that you can step into. There's the premise of letting go of the fears that you've held on to or have maybe been exposed more and more. Yeah. But I think there's also, when it comes to people in general, this isn't just immigrants by any means, but I think that when it comes to people, we definitely just want to give people dignity, see them as a human being that deserves respect, I think that's one thing that kind of, without saying, can be done.
Oh, yeah.
And I think it shows. It shows whenever, people feel like they're invited into a space, whenever people feel like not only are they invited, but they have a seat at the table, they're able to express their voice, feel seen, feel heard. Yeah. I think that's just one of those things that we want to challenge you guys as well with, is just, even if you don't have all the knowledge, even if you don't have all the education, and, like we were talking about with the stories that are going to be shared, even if you don't understand that in the same way, I think just presenting yourself in a position that dignifies people and helps them feel like genuine people. Yeah. They're not less than, they're not.
That's so good.
They're not a part of this, I think that's just something that really is important as we go into these conversations.
Yeah, because when we talk about people, we talk about image bearers, and we forget that. We forget, hey, were created by God, and there's a story, there's a specific intention of why, their story is the way that is.
Right, he sees us the same.
Yeah. So
we're not better than anybody else.
Yeah, And thank you for saying that, because I think, for me personally, and immigrating here, as what happens a lot for us who come here, we try to assimilate in a way. You try to process all the things. You just moved to a whole new country, new people. And many times you will hear from a lot of immigrants, it's like, no, you just put your head down. We don't want to ruffle any feathers, to the expense of our own dignity, to the expense of even thinking ourselves that we deserve a seat on the table. Yeah. And I think that also the other reason why, for me, it's a vulnerable thing to step into is because my story hasn't been dignified in the past. As I have experienced hurtful things that make me want to shut myself out and be like, I am not going to share with you. I'm going to try to just put this wall, but I'm like, it's a challenge for me as well to be reminded of like, no, like it's important. And I think that that's why I had a little bit of pressure. I think what it was a couple of weeks ago, I was like, Anna, like all of this, because I feel the responsibility also, because there's so many people that, I mean, I'm bilingual. So I'm like, I feel the responsibility for my family members who don't speak English, you know, and my friends who do not speak English. I'm like, ooh, it feels like a big responsibility, and the beauty of like, hey, I get to share about our experience. You know, you get to see. We're not just gonna hold our heads down and just, you know, we're just here surviving. No, we're gonna thrive. We're gonna tell the stories. We're gonna, you know, step into it more confidently, which that in itself is a whole thing the Lord has been doing in the last 5 years that I've lived here. You know, stepping into that confidence of like, no, you have a seat at the table. I know you've been told you don't. I know you're supposed to look like this. You're supposed to do only. You're limited to this, like, and all the limitations. But then Jesus is like, no, this is my table. So you're welcome here. You're welcome here. So you took me in. You know. So
as a perfect transition to that, you all are welcome here. We want you to know that first and foremost. Whatever you've been through, whatever you've walked through, we love you guys, and we support you, and we encourage you, and we're cheering you on. Because this is not, like we said at the beginning, this is not an easy topic. This is not something that a lot of people talk about, but we definitely feel like it's necessary to step into.
Well, thank you for joining us, and then tune in for our next episode where we'll get to dive deeper into all that.
I love it. Okay. All right, guys. Well, be blessed. Have a good day.
Have a good day.